For nearly 2 decades, one 4-minute audition has followed Simon Cowell everywhere he goes. It shows up in interviews and podcasts, in retrospectives about his career, and in the quiet moments when someone asks him what talent television actually taught him about people. The audition is Susan Boyle's, recorded in a small studio in 2009. And what makes it remarkable isn't just what happened on stage that day. It's what Simon Cowell has admitted on the record again and again in the years since, that he got it wrong, that he judged her before she opened her mouth, and that watching the footage back still makes him wince. This isn't a story that needs exaggeration. The real version, built from Susan Boyle's own words and Simon Cowell's own recent interviews, is already one of the most human moments in reality television history. Susan Boyle was born and raised in Blackburn, a small town in West Lothian, Scotland, one of several children in a working-class family. As a child, she struggled in school and was bullied by classmates who saw her as different. For most of her life, she carried a label she had been given after complications at birth. She was told she had suffered mild brain damage. That label followed her through childhood and into adulthood, shaping how teachers, neighbors, and eventually the public would see her long, before anyone knew what she could do with her voice. Music was the one place where none of that mattered. Susan sang in her local church choir, took part in community theater productions, and spent years quietly performing in small halls and competitions around Scotland without any expectation that the world beyond her town would ever hear her. She worked as a charity volunteer and, for long stretches of her adult life, cared for her aging parents, putting her own ambitions on hold. By the time she was in her 40s, singing was still her passion, but stardom seemed like a door that had already closed. She had auditioned for talent competitions before and been turned away. In April 2009, at 47 years old, Susan Boyle walked onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent to audition in front of judges Simon Cowell, Piers Morgan, and Amanda Holden. She wore a simple dress, styled her hair without any real intention of matching celebrity standards, and, by her own later account, felt the room's judgment before she had sung a single note. The now-famous footage tells the story on its own. Susan walked out, and the audience visibly smirked. The judges leaned back with the posture of people already expecting to send her home. Susan herself later described the atmosphere as something close to humiliating. Speaking to the Irish Mirror years afterward, she said the moment felt quite suffocating, comparing herself to an act in a freak show. She recalled the crowd's reaction to her appearance before she ever opened her mouth to sing, saying people were laughing and wondering, in her words, who this daft woman with the crazy hair was. Then she began to sing I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables, and the entire room changed within seconds. The skepticism dissolved into stunned silence, then into a standing ovation. Her voice, powerful, controlled, and full of emotion that had clearly been building for a lifetime, didn't just surprise the judges. It upended every assumption the audience had made about her in the previous 30 seconds. The video of that audition went on to become one of the most watched clips in television history, viewed hundreds of millions of times and translated into dozens of languages as it spread across the world. Susan went on to finish as the runner-up of that season, losing the final to the dance group Diversity. But in almost every measurable way, the audition made her a bigger star than winning would have. Her debut album became one of the best-selling releases of the year internationally, and she has gone on to sell more than 20 million records worldwide, notched multiple #1 albums in both the UK and the US, and entered the Guinness World Records for her achievements. She built a music career that has spanned well over a decade beyond the moment that made her famous, including a Christmas film cameo, a stage musical based on her life, and a catalog of albums that continue to find audiences long after the initial viral wave faded. What made Susan Boyle's story resonate wasn't just the voice. It was the speed and force of the fame that followed, and how unprepared the world, and Susan herself, was for it. Within days of the audition airing, she went from a private, largely unknown woman in a small Scottish town to one of the most recognized faces on the planet. The scrutiny that came with that transition was intense, and, at times, cruel. Tabloid coverage frequently focused on her appearance, her mannerisms, and her unfamiliarity with the trappings of celebrity rather than her talent. Reports at the time noted that she was treated for exhaustion and the toll of sudden stress not long after her run on the show ended, a detail that made clear just how disorienting the whirlwind had been for someone who had spent most of her adult life living quietly. Years later, the full picture of what Susan had been carrying became clearer. In December 2013, she revealed to The Observer that she had been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism that affects social interaction and communication. The diagnosis came after a lifetime of being told she had brain damage, a label she said had never felt right. "It was the wrong diagnosis when I was a kid," she told the paper. "I was told I had brain damage. I always knew it was an unfair label." Getting the correct diagnosis, she said, brought her relief rather than distress. "Now I have a clearer understanding of what's wrong, and I feel relieved and a bit more relaxed about myself." Susan has since spoken candidly about how the diagnosis reframed years of misunderstanding, both the bullying she experienced as a child and the difficulties she faced adjusting to fame as an adult. She described struggling with the sensory and social demands of a career that put her constantly in front of cameras, crowds, and strangers, and she had been open about living with anxiety throughout her life, rather than retreating from public life. She used her platform to talk honestly about neurodiversity and mental health at a time when very few celebrities were doing so, helping push those conversations further into the mainstream than they had been before. Her openness didn't erase the challenges. She has spoken about ongoing health issues over the years, including periods where illness forced her to step back from performing, and about the emotional weight of losing both of her parents, whose care had shaped so much of her adult life before fame ever entered the picture. Through all of it, she kept working, kept releasing music, and kept choosing which parts of her life to share on her own terms, a kind of quiet control that friends and colleagues have described as central to who she is. For years, Simon Cowell's public image was built almost entirely around detachment, blunt critiques, minimal sentiment, and a reputation as a judge least likely to be moved by anything happening in front of him. That reputation made his repeated, increasingly candid reflections on Susan Boyle's audition stand out all the more. Speaking on Jamie E. Celebrity Trench's podcast, Cowell looked back at the footage of that first audition and didn't soften what he saw. "I look back and I just think, my God, we look so awful, horrible," he said. "I actually don't think we look bad enough. I think we were even worse than that." He described the exchange of skeptical glances between himself and Piers Morgan as among the worst looks he can remember giving anyone on camera, adding bluntly, "We are awful, all of us." Cowell has been equally direct about why that moment has stayed with him. He explained that in the seconds before Susan began singing, he assumed, based on nothing but her appearance and manner backstage, that she might be a comedian playing a bit rather than a serious vocalist. "I think at the corner of my eye, I must have seen her messing around the wings or something, because I thought she was a comedian, a stand-up comedian," he told Extra's Terry Seymour. It's a small, specific admission, but it captures exactly how quickly and how wrongly he had sized her up before she ever opened her mouth. Rather than distancing himself from the moment as the years passed, Cowell has repeatedly returned to it as a turning point in how he thinks about judging people. "Of course I had the ability to cut all of that stuff out," he said, referring to the editing tools available to him as a producer. "But it was a bit of a wake-up call. You can't judge a book by its cover." He's described the panel's reaction as disgusting in hindsight and said plainly that the lesson of that day was about the danger of snap judgments, a lesson he suggested has shaped how he approaches auditions ever since. Amanda Holden, who sat beside him that day, has echoed the same sentiment publicly, saying she believes the judge's reaction was the biggest wake-up call ever, and admitting they were being really cynical towards someone they had never given a real chance. Cowell's regard for Susan has only grown more pronounced with time. Reflecting on her impact on the show 15 years later, he told Extra that he absolutely adores her, adding that she did more good for our show than probably any other contestant. That's a striking statement from a man whose career has been built on discovering and evaluating thousands of performers, a signal of just how much that single audition reshaped his understanding of what the show and the people who walk onto its stage are really about. What makes the real relationship between Simon Cowell and Susan Boyle compelling isn't a fabricated moment of tears or an invented late-night phone call. It's something more grounded and, in some ways, more meaningful. A public figure known for snap judgments openly, repeatedly, and specifically admitting he made one, and naming exactly how and why he got it wrong. Susan Boyle's journey has become a reference point far beyond music. Her audition is still cited as one of the clearest examples of how quickly people can be misjudged based on appearance, age, or unfamiliarity with what stardom is supposed to look like. Her willingness to talk openly about her Asperger's diagnosis, her anxiety, and the pressures of sudden fame helped normalize conversations about neurodiversity and mental health in an industry that historically avoided them. And her continued career, albums, tours, a stage musical, a film role, stands as proof that the moment on stage in 2009 was the beginning of a real, sustained career rather than a single viral flash. For Simon Cowell, the story has become something he keeps coming back to publicly, unprompted, years after it happened. That in itself says something. People in his position rarely revisit their worst on-camera moments this openly, let alone describe their own reactions as disgusting and horrible without being pushed to. His repeated willingness to do exactly that, alongside his stated admiration for what Susan built afterward, is the real emotional core of this story. Not a scripted breakdown, but an honest, public reassessment that has held up for more than 15 years. Susan Boyle didn't just deliver an unforgettable performance. In April 2009, she forced one of television's most guarded judges to publicly reckon with how wrong first impressions can be. And he's still talking about it today.